Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing swell. How you doing, Bob? How are things in Florida?
It was a beautiful day. Went to the pool, got some sun, been taking care of some business down here, family stuff that we need to take care of. Everything is great, as best as it can be, at least. And it's another beautiful day in this country, I think. Or maybe I'm lying. That's how it goes.
Well, we got our long stranded astronauts down finally,
And that is
and
that is a good thing.
that's a good thing.
Congra-
And we
wonderful.
need to celebrate anything good.
Well, I think the better celebration is that Becky Burke is back in the UK, so we need to celebrate
Absolutely.
that. I think I'm a little more excited about that one.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
uh, you know, because they're, you know, while I don't want to compare one or the other, but it's just important that people who are innocent are not being captives, and we have too many of that going on in this country that we shouldn't be having.
She was held in a lockup in Tacoma, and I haven't been to Tacoma in about 10, 12 years. And it's a nice area. I'm sure the lockup isn't, because they're not. Um, but it is the only part of the world where a chef offered to make me a barbecued rat.
You had a barbecue rat. Did you eat it?
Well, he had it on his menu.
And you said yes or no to the barbecue rat in Tacoma.
He tried to talk me into it. He quickly caught on that I knew my stuff when it came to barbecue and took me and my friends on a tour of the kitchen.
And
I, I was very impressed. The food was great. I didn't have the rat, because I'm not RFK 2. But but the food was very good. I mean, I love the Northwest. The only thing I don't like about the Northwest is that they call it the Pacific Northwest, which led me to start referring to where I live in New England as the Atlantic Northeast.
well, you should. There we
I
go.
should,
Why not?
until Trump changes the name.
Well, it's we're in a weird state. Things come out. There's news that's announced every day. Some of it's real, some of it's not. Some of it's wishes, some of it's devastating. We're going to try and keep it a little lighter tonight. We have a great guest. He's already here waiting in the green room. Mike Oeming is going to be here, otherwise known professionally as Michael Avon Oeming, which we will get into an interesting thing about his middle name and how it's used. Um, but that's going to be a fun conversation. There's some other news we want to get to besides the fact that we want to again be thankful that Becky Burke is back in the UK, and we've been talking about her on the show. We want to celebrate that. Some film and TV news. This is speculation, but I wanted your opinion on it. We had heard a while back that Daniel Craig was in the mix to be Sergeant Rock in the James Gunn DCU. That has ended. Apparently, Daniel Craig is no longer associated with it, and there's a new actor who is in talks to be Sergeant Rock. Have you seen this?
I have, but
It is
perhaps,
so the actor in talks is Colin Farrell.
yeah, it's going to make for a great crossover. My understanding of this project is that it is square in the middle of the cinematic universe, the new one, or the one
Mhm.
that, yeah, I guess the new one, and therefore kind of provides a starting point, I guess, for how they're going to do it in the movies. I don't know, but that's the way that they're making it sound. I think Colin Farrell is one of the great actors of our time, and I think The Penguin was just a killer series, absolutely killer. But it's an acting role. One has nothing to do with the other. He's not going to play Frank Rock like he plays, you know, um, what do they call him on the show? Just Oz.
Was.
And that's good. That's okay. That's what actors do.
No,
I'm
yes.
okay with that. I mean, it could have been. They could have cast him as Doctor Doom. We don't know.
Right. Listen, I think it's interesting. I think he's a good actor. I want a good actor to play that role.
You bet.
I think my understanding of how they're trying to play that is it's a standalone movie. It's not necessarily going to be part of any sort of thing, but it will give flesh to the history of this universe.
Right. Just a starting point, and that's good.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop them from doing an earlier movie, movie set at earlier times. It just provides something that they don't have right now that I think would probably be helpful. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. They tend to put other characters in these movies, and if you think about it, the Easy Company has enough of its own characters. Plus, we got plenty of Nazis, and we're talking about the German Nazis, the ones that people who watch television are comfortable with. So this could be a good, solid war movie. Luckily, we won't have Robert Kanigher to ask for an opinion.
Well, that's fine. I don't need his opinion on anything, to be honest with you.
No.
And we have now officially got our first Kanigher reference of the night, so we need to keep ticking them off. Let's talk. First of all, I want you to please go to popculturesquad.com and check out the new number ones that was posted today. There's a bunch of really, really good new issues coming out this week that are new number ones. But also go to your comic shop or wherever you're going to go. There's a ton of good stuff that has been coming out. It's a really good week for comics. I want to just talk about one because I do want to get our guest in as soon as possible. But there's a book coming out this week called LA Strong, and it's Mad Cave put it together very quickly, and it is. I'm going to read a little bit of the copy. It says, "Comic book industry pulls together to support fellow creators who lost their homes to the tragic 2025 Los Angeles fires with this benefit anthology special, featuring contributions from like everybody: Barbara Kiesel, Brian Azzarello, Brian Bendis, Chris Gage, Dan DiDio, Jimmy Palmiotti, Steve Orlando, Stephanie Phillips, Marv Wolfman, Allison Sampson, Amanda Connor, Christian Ward, Michael Avon Oeming, Nico Leon, Salvador LaRocca, Sammy Cavella, so many more. Together as a community, we can be LA strong for one another. 100% of these profits are donated for relief efforts."
And let us thank Mad Cave for doing all the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. We may be able to talk a little bit more about this with our guest on Thursday. We do have a show on Thursday, folks. And our guest is a senior editor for Mad Cave. So we will see if we can talk about that. But again, this is at your local comic shop or Amazon or wherever it is you get comics. If you get comics and you buy them, this book will go towards the proceeds of this book will go towards.
And if for some reason you find yourself just sort of somehow obtaining a copy, perhaps digitally or what have you, cool, fine, sure, send them a check.
Yep. I'm sure there is a place to donate inside the book. I haven't seen it yet, but also you could probably get the book directly from Mad Cave if you buy things digitally. So think about that. It's important to help people out, and especially even some of our fellow creators that we know have lost their homes and valuables.
It's a horrible thing. I remember seeing Len Wein shortly after his house burned down, not due to the fires or anything like that. And this was like 15 years ago. Okay. And it had happened months and months later. And I had a good idea, having been to Len's house and also the one he had before that in Queens. And the idea, it's like a museum burning.
Sure.
Jay Lynch had,
like your house burning would be the same.
oh, it'll burn for a while, yeah. Jay Lynch had a phenomenal collection of esoteria, what we would consider esoteria. Jay-Z considered it, Thursday, including Jack Cole's Suicide Note. He was such a collector of Jack Cole's work. I'm sorry?
Who had Jack Cole's Suicide Note?
Jay Lynch, the underground cartoonist and teacher and a poster artist.
And it is now gone to history?
Here's the deal. Since you asked, Jay-Z, like many of us, was just a phenomenal Jack Cole fan. Deservedly so. Jack Cole was a goddamn genius.
Of course.
His Plastic Man alone, he did a lot of other stuff. It is just brilliant stuff. And he collected it. And he taught it at a very prestigious place. He taught at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I would even sort of do a couple of his classes with him, as a guest. And he taught Cole there as cartooning, as part of his cartooning classes. And the word got out that he was such a Cole fan that a fellow Cole fan for whom Jay-Z often worked, a guy named Hugh Hefner, who was a cartoonist and published.
I do know he was a big Cole fan.
He published Cole from almost the first issue of Playboy, maybe the first. Beautiful, beautiful, full page, full color stuff, just drop dead gorgeous. Cole wrote his suicide, what we refer to as his suicide note, to Hugh, apologizing that because he was going to take his life, he wouldn't be able to pay Hefner back for the loan that he gave him. And he apologized for that. And Hefner couldn't throw it away. I get that. But he didn't know what to do with it. I get that too. And then, he and Jay were talking about all that. Skip Williamson was the art director. So it was like old home week for Chicagoans. And he said, well, I have it. I have it here. If you want it, it's yours. And Jay said yes, and became the most remarkable completist collector I'd ever heard of.
Okay. Now we've gone down the maudlin path. In other news, and I'm going to segue out of this, there's two bits of comic news I want to get to that kind of got announced over the last day or so. One is, we'll go with the more maudlin. There's going to be a comic book version that is a sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show in honor of its 50th anniversary. It is going to be called The Bride of Rocky Horror, and is going to be written by Mags Visaggio. I think that sounds okay. I'm pretty okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, it certainly piques my curiosity.
Sure.
The show itself, I mean, I saw it, I think, in its original run on the Lower East Side of New York back in the 1400s or something.
Right. 50 years ago.
If I have it correct, it was in a theater across the street from the Fillmore East. I may be mistaken about that. And it was such a good fit for the Lower East Side at the time. This was the days of the burgeoning hippie movement, or this kind of the waning hippie movement, and the burgeoning punk scene, which was very, very strong in the Lower East Side. So you really had a meeting of the generations there, because both the hippies, of which I am a part of the hippie generation, you may have noticed. And, the kids who grew up with punk rock, who thought they were going to scare us, they probably scared some of us. Not those of us who had been on the Lower East Side. It was a wonderful event. It was like Hamilton to us.
Sure, sure. Like I said, I think Mags is a good choice.
Absolutely.
And just keeping in track with our guest, she's working on a book called Galaxy of Madness that is drawn by our guest Michael Avon Oeming. So she's got a lot of work to do. She's got a lot of work lately, and I'm glad to hear that.
Have you noticed that Mike does like everything?
Yeah, have you know he's just everything we're talking about. He's involved, and that's just how it goes. So we're gonna get him in really shortly. I just want to I got one more thing, and we're gonna bring Mike in. There was an announcement by Bad Idea Comics, and they have this book that's coming out called Planet Death number 0, right? Planet Death. It Bad Idea started in about 2020. They have these strange ideas. I won't call them bad ideas, but they are strange. They were not widely distributed to every comic book shop. You had to be a direct distributor, so you had to make an account with them. So not every comic book shop. The comic book shop that I visit on a regular basis was not one of those. So I have not really had an opportunity to get those books. Sorry. And they are now doing that. So they have now changed their platform. They are now going to have books widely distributed through Lunar. And this is the first one, and it has sold 665,000 issues. I think that's a lie. I think they just didn't want to say 666,000, but I think they wanted to. They just had to. They're crazy people. Dinesh Souza is the CEO, we're friends with some of the other people there. This book is actually written by a screenwriter who I cannot remember off the top of my head because I don't have it in front of me, but also by Robert Venditti. I saw them talking about this book at New York Comic Con. I think it's going to be pretty cool, but that's a lot of comics.
It's a lot of comics. It's it harkens back to
Did you see the math around it though?
Yes.
So they're selling them super cheap in bundles,
right?
Which is good. Comics go out there.
Look, anything that promotes the medium is good to me, except something really disgusting, and I can't think of anything that meets that in comics form. I know of some comics people who've done disgusting work in other media, but we'll let that go for the moment.
All right. I think it's good. There's new stuff. There's lots of good stuff going on in comics. Again, check out your local shop this week because it's important. But I really want to get to our guest. We have a lot to talk about with him. And so he began his career in the early 90s when he was about 2.5 years old, because he's my age, and has become a superstar, has won Eisner Awards and other awards. It is hold on, I need to get something here. You first became aware of his work, and we're going to bring that up in just a minute. But all right, give me 1 second, folks. I gotta upload something here. It's going to take me a sec.
You're working your computer, not your microwave, right?
No, well, but I also am limited in terms of my bandwidth. So give me 1 sec here, folks. I don't know what happened to the video that I had set. I'm going to bring him in. There's not much that I run into Mike's work that I don't like at all. I find his style to be refreshing and exciting. So in just a second, you're going to see the sum of it, or at least some of it, as well
Some
as the sum of the sum. All right. All right. I don't know what happened there.
I'm just quietly watching you play with your remote.
I know, it's very upsetting. You have no idea, everyone. So I'm going to be very, very angry with myself for this not showing up the way it's supposed to.
I've been on a lot of strange remotes in my career.
It is. I mean, it is a remote. So there's things aren't the way they normally are. You know, I could have just played the John Ostrander video that's sitting here waiting for John to actually come on the show. And that would have been fun. But eventually we will get to play that video.
I think we should get Terrence and Philip to do a fill-in show.
All right. Without further ado, Mike Oeming. Hey, Mike.
Wow, man, that's like an obituary video you could play at my funeral. Like that was everything.
We would have to speed it up.
Listen, I didn't show everything.
That was amazing. That was amazing. Yeah, there was a couple of pieces like the really deep dive stuff in there at the beginning. In fact, that kill rate issue is something I don't think I've seen in like forever.
Right. Well, I made sure I got the caliber version as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks, guys, and thanks for that very kind introduction. That was very nice.
You know, it's not a linear career. It's not a linear progression. You know, what makes you look at all of these different projects and go, "Yeah, that's what I want to do"? Because there's no connection. I mean, it's not big projects; it's just attitude.
I mean, I think now I have like kind of a specific vibe or direction, but early on, it was just employment, so like a lot of that stuff, that super early stuff was just, there was a time where like you didn't, to get a comic book out, you needed to have some sort of shtick if you weren't at Marvel and DC, and we're talking like early 90s and late 80s. So there was like a lot of like rock and roll comics, porn parody comics, and
so yeah, I mean, like we'll just leave it this way, but I will tell you that one of my best friends is Tom Zoller, and you may have worked together in those early days.
Probably. Okay,
I believe he lettered something new.
Oh wow, awesome.
So,
yeah. So it was just kind of
included. That was not included in the video.
I was one of those.
Yes.
But that's how you got stuff printed, was because you just didn't, like, you would start on a book. Actually, you wouldn't bother starting on a book. Typically what would happen is you would solicit it and then find out if you had enough orders to print. Then you'd start to work on it. And that stuff was a great training ground for me because it taught me how to be fast. It taught me how to hit deadlines, as opposed to sort of curating every single piece of the drawing and massaging everything. Just learn to move. My buddy Adam Hughes said, I learned to draw fast first and good later. And he wasn't wrong. And it's not an insult. I think it's like a good way to figure things out,
Sure. I want to talk about we're not going to do this linearly because there's something that kind of stuck out to me while I was looking through. And this book you put out, it's an art book that you guys put out. The title really sticks to me. No Plan B, right?
Yeah.
And you said something recently in one of your TikToks, which go follow Mike on TikTok because it's a lot of fun, about being codependent with the work.
Yeah.
So you pretty much had no choice in this career that you have. Is that fair?
Yeah. I found it. I was lucky enough to find my love and passion for this at an early age. I was probably 12 or 13. And from that moment on, like, I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I became fairly obsessed with it. I think because I was a oddball who I didn't have anything I was good at, and I had a lot of low self-esteem. So you combine those things with finding something that you have some talent for, and you just become completely laser-like focused on it. It got in the way of everything else. It got in the way of friendships and school, everything. Because this is all I did. Like I would, in high school, I would stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, come in late, and I even got it down to like a math of like how many late days can I have that counts as like if you're in before a certain time, before 12 o'clock, it counted as a full day. It was just a late day. So like this is how I was working as a kid.
Right.
And this is how focused I was on all of it. And so that's kind of where that title comes from, was No Plan B. This was it. I was just going to do comics, and I didn't have any other sort of skills. That's also sort of the background I came from. I came from like a poor working class family, so the expectations were just stay out of jail and have a decent job of some kind, right?
Right.
Which is getting harder and harder for the, every average American to just have a job, like you can't get by on a job anymore,
Sure.
So I was really, really lucky to find this. And yeah, that was the No Plan B meant. Like, this was it. This is what I'm going to do.
When I started working full time in comics, which was for DC back in '76, if you were good enough, I'm not saying brilliant, but good enough, and you made your deadlines and you didn't give people too much shit, with 1 or 2 exceptions, you pretty much were guaranteed a job of a lifetime. Sadly, that's pretty much how Kurt Swan felt. How all of a sudden he's out of work. He's not doing Superman. All he was doing was Superman. He's senior citizen, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All performance art, in my opinion, and by performance art, I don't mean like the people who cut their dicks off on stage. It's any type of performance art. It's a high wire act.
Yeah.
And getting on that high wire, making that move, putting that foot on the wire takes so much courage. And there is no plan B when you put your foot on that wire.
Yeah.
So I respect and admire anybody who's in any performing field who will do that, who will take that step, because they're not taking it because it's going to make the world a better place. I mean, maybe, but that's, it's not because you want to, because that is your creative fulfillment. It is something you have to do. It sounds like your secret origin was much like that.
Yeah, very much so. Also, it's easy to say I just threw myself into it because I had nothing at risk. A lot of people when they're, and again, this is sort of a weird advantage of being poor growing up, right? Is like you don't have anything to lose. So in a weird way, while you don't have those connections, you don't have somebody giving you a home, you don't have somebody setting you up with jobs or, that kind of stuff, right? There's a sort of like, there's no boundaries because really I've got nothing to lose. Whereas like, say you want to be a comic book artist, but you grew up in an affluent family who has a business, there's all this pressure to lean into that business, right? And even if you're not getting pressure from your family, there's probably a thought of like, if you're a well-centered person, you're thinking, wow, look at this opportunity that I have. Most people don't have this thing waiting for me, and I want to go to art school to draw comics.
And
so it was
that better come to fruition pretty quickly because you can't hold that other thing off, right? There's that other pressure.
Yeah,
there's no time for learning curve.
And if you realize, when you come to the realization that it doesn't really matter because your family isn't going to like you anyway, then follow your heart. But your heart follows the brain.
Yeah. I mean, and I had a really great experience, which was a terrible experience, but it was a great experience. Was I had done the comic book thing where you're building your career, right? And you start out doing indie books, and I'm sending out inking samples. I probably sent some to you at some point, and it builds and builds, and then suddenly you get like your first little jobs, and your little jobs get the bigger jobs, and then eventually I'm drawing Judge Dredd,
Right. That was a big spot, right? That was
Yeah. So
break.
in my mind, I had made it, right?
Right.
And it's a big books, big flagship books. They're going to spin out and do other books, and I'm at the front of these, and I'm flying to conventions and stuff like that. And I lasted about 6 issues. We could talk about that a little bit because I was very young on the book, and I wasn't quite ready for the job, so I kind of burnt out, and there was some stuff there. But then it went on to Foot Soldiers at Dark Horse with Jim Kruger, and that was a great experience. But that's when we had that not first, but one of the many comic book collapses. Everybody's panic out about what's happening right now. I've lived through at least 3 collapses of the industry. And that was one of them through the speculator market in the mid-90s. My career went away. Like I had gone from doing these big books to then I was inking like Ninjak with my buddy Neil Vokes, and I only got that because he was my friend. To eventually just nothing, and I had to go get a real job at age 23, I think it was, because my son was born. So I went from the dream and comics to losing it all. And the reason why this was actually good, it was about a 1.5-year period where I had to rethink everything. I had to think like, well, what comics do I want to do? Why am I trying to draw the way editors want me to draw, the way I think that the industry wants me to draw? And I had done this kind of Bruce Timmey kind of stuff, trying to get onto some of the adventures book. And while I couldn't really hit the style, I started to find my own voice in it, and I was getting a lot of good reactions from it. And that's when I started to think about, well, what do I want to draw for me? And I was like, all right, if I can't work at Marvel and DC anymore, I'm just going to find a part-time job. And I did, which was at a security thing where I can draw. So like I'm doing, minimum wage, which is kind of the same 30 years later, $7.25 an hour, it's like is what I was getting paid. That's still like the minimum wage in this country. And I'm just drawing the comics there. And that's when I met Brian Bendis, and that's when I met David Mack, and things started to change. And I figured out who I wanted to be as an artist because it all kind of went away. So even though I was all in this thing, this sort of no plan B philosophy, even when it fell apart, it just made me think more about what I wanted to do as an artist and why I wanted to do this. And it was a great lesson because now when I get the second wave of success, I was much more appreciative in a different and deeper way. And it's much more precious to me. And I think about the future constantly, which is kind of why I've survived, I think, all these years. I'm starting to ramble, but I forget what we were originally talking about.
No, it's great. You completely answered the question that I have here. In that, how did you? My question is kind of like, you have such a distinctive style, and it is distinct, and it has evolved since. But Powers was the change for what people saw. How did you get to that visual identity? Like you kind of talked about, like you had that time where you kind of crafted it, and when you presented how you were going to draw Powers to Brian and how that worked out, did you feel authentic?
Oh, 100%. There was all this change that happened. So like I said, I couldn't get the job. My son was born. So now I'm working a part-time job and I'm raising my son with my wife and stuff, right? I just had way less time to work. As before I could sit there and I wanted to be, Michael Golden and Art Adams and Kevin Nolan. There was all this line work and detail put into everything. And I did enjoy that kind of stuff, but when I started to notice that people were reacting really well to these submissions that I was doing for the Adventures book, and I think I eventually got on one of the Adventures books, I started to understand some of the other artists that I had appreciated but not understood. Alex Toth, John Buscema, because when I came up, John Buscema I had seen so many copies of his stuff that by the time I really looked at John Buscema's work, the Marvel House style of the early 80s and late 70s, it diminished that in my eyes. So I couldn't see John Buscema for the longest time. But it was through the appreciation of Bruce Timm to Alex Toth to him, like all of this other stuff started to open up to me. And I no longer looked at I needed the lines. And I realized with this less amount of time to work, a rendering style that didn't require me to draw every arm on somebody's hair, every hair on somebody's arm, or tons of rendering like I liked, I had more time to get stuff done, because sometimes I'd have 2 hours a day where I could draw, and that was it, right? So how can you make comics on 2 hours a day? That sounds impossible. While drawing simply isn't easier, the rendering part of it becomes less of a time-consuming thing. So those things all came together. Like, the practicality of it was part of it, but I really opened up how I understood other artists. And that got me into like just form and shape and composition, how much you could say with less lines. And that's when it really opened up for me. And that's why it felt really like authentic. And I had met Brian Bendis and David Mack at like a store signing. And I just drew my characters, or their characters, in my style. And that's kind of where it went. And, at that point, I didn't know what to do with the style or anything. So some of it's also, good timing, meeting the right people at the right time. Yeah.
You are the second comics professional I know who has spent time as a security guard. The first one is our frequent non-appearing guest, John Ostrander, my oldest friend, guy who I cut my right arm off for. I am left-handed. But when he was in theater, going to school at Loyola, wonderful theater department, he had a job, all of us being working class. So he had we needed to pay the rent. We didn't even have a kid.
Yeah.
To pay the rent,
Yeah.
So he got a job as a security guard with a friend of ours, until one day when the security guards, my two friends, had to call the cops because inadvertently they had taken out their handcuffs and handcuffed each other to a pole.
Oh my God.
And that was, I think that may have been the end of John's career as a security.
Wow.
The theater and comics are so much better off for that.
Yes, exactly.
You made the right choice.
Yeah,
I mean, I got it because I was literally thinking, well, what can I do where I can still kind of draw, and that was it. And what's funny is a friend of mine named John Broglia. He's another prolific artist, and he's working on a book with my wife Taki Soma right now. And he took my advice. Like, he took a security guard job so that he could draw comics while he's working and stuff. And depending on the kind of job that you have, like the employers are fine with it because they know you're there and you're aware of stuff. In my case, it was at a place called Nade in New Jersey, which was like this auto dealership, and it was like football fields full of cars, and like truckers would come in like completely high on whatever meth they were keeping them awake on the road with, and I'd record the VIN numbers and put stuff in. But I drew like the first 4 issues of Powers and like a little Superman police guard box with a little desk on it and stuff.
Nice.
And years later, Brian and I had this great moment where Powers had been greenlit for a television show, and we're pulling in to watch some filming stuff, and to go to the parking lot, there's the security booth of a guy in there, same type of booth that I was in and stuff, and it was like this nice full circle moment.
That's perfect. I think Jason Aaron also worked as security in a warehouse.
Oh wow.
So there you go.
There's a moment when you first drive onto a studio parking lot, and the security guard in the booth, asks you who you are and why the hell are you making his life more complicated. And you realize you have seen that scene in so many movies, and now you're going into the studio.
Yeah.
That first time, it's really weird, or at least for me, it was just truly like,
oh, this really happens. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like, wow. Yeah. It's like finding out that Tex Avery physics works. It's not something you want to know necessarily.
Yeah, that's funny.
I mean, we're talking about it, so let's talk about Powers just a little bit. And hi, Joe, how you doing?
Oh, hello, Joe.
Glad you're watching. So it was a Um, it was a huge hit. It was award winning. It became a TV show. It is still considered one of the changes in the renaissance of comics in the early 2000s. Did you know that when you started talking about what it would be?
No, I mean, we thought we were crazy for trying to go color. Like that seemed insane. In fact, we were prepared. We figured by issue 5 we have to switch to black and white. But we were very lucky, and we were lucky in a lot of ways. This is the thing about success, and I think you both will have seen this. And I want people to hear this part. Success isn't just about talent. It is not about how good you are.
Right.
You need to have the right timing for things. You need certain things to fall in place that are beyond your control. So Powers coming out when it did, making a sort of anti-superhero is the wrong word, but let's use that, this sort of anti-superhero statement at a time where it was still the back end boom of the 90s stuff, right? Of like the big Jim Lee and California style comics. And if we had come out with that book earlier or later, I don't know that it would have taken off. If we came out with it now, the exact same book, so much of that has already been said. I don't think it would make that same splash. Brian was also coming up in his career. Like he had just started writing Ultimate Spider-Man, which they also didn't think was going to be, they thought it was going to be a miniseries, and that was it. So yeah, we didn't think it was going to make this sort of a landmark thing, and to be able to do something like that, in retrospect, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, and it's crazy. It's crazy to think like, that was part of something like that.
You're in the wake of Watchmen.
Yeah, we're Watchmen babies.
So I think that the audience was because Watchmen, huge. The audience was kind of waiting to see, even if they didn't know it, what was going to sail in those waters.
Yeah.
And your hardcore superhero private eye police cop situation, particularly with your style. And yes, you can invoke Alex Toth as often as you want, as long as you're not as loony as Alex was, and half as talented, and you're at least half as talented. and that's amazing. It was a perfect thing as far as, and I'm speaking as a reader, not as a guy who's, who writes down comic book business on his passport.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, man.
It's so when my wife and I got together, and I told her about my love for comics, and she has a love for comics. She had read things and stuff. So there's a couple of things that I'm like, all right, I know there are things you're going to like, and Powers was definitely very early on in the thing. I'm like, here's Powers, read this. And she said earlier she loves it. It was difficult to get, like we needed the omnibus, because like trying to get which is the version that we got to get the collection.
I can't keep up with it. I mean, because we had been with every publisher,
right? Which is amazing.
Yeah, somebody will ask me like, "What issue was this?" I'm like, "I don't know," and and it doesn't help when I'm selling my art, because I never for years I never labeled my pages.
Right, and then there's multiple.
So right.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a mess.
Well, that puts you in a category with Franz Kafka, and I'm sure.
He's my favorite.
I'm sure that's something you really inspire to. Because when he wrote, was it America? I think it was America. He didn't want it published. He wanted it burned after he died, but his agent couldn't do that. But nobody knew for sure the order of the chapters. Interesting.
The
chapters weren't numbered, and nobody was even sure that they were all there. Some chapters weren't written, or some chapters disappeared, or what have you. So you and Powers have now been compared to Franz Kafka. Congratulations.
Thank you. That's all I needed. I feel like we live in a Kafka world, so
Yeah.
yeah.
It keeps getting more and more. So
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about William of Newbury, which is you.
Thank you.
Is there going to be their second volume? Are we working on that? Okay, great.
I'm working on it for sure. Like
Volume one is fantastic. I love this book.
Thank you.
I feel like it's exactly the perfect, moving point from Alter, from your other book prior to that. And
Vice Templar.
no, I think I lost the title. The one you and Taki did. The one you and Taki did kickstarted.
Oh, the After Realm.
After Realm, yes. I'm sorry. Because I think that the storytelling continues to get better and better as you go along, and I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the fullness of this character in how much of a sad sack he is, and yet such a great hero. This, in spite of his history, and it's just what brought this book forward.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I will say, like, so I'm 52 now, so I think I was like around 50 when that book was coming together, and it's the first time I felt like I had solved the puzzle of my own writing. Or I always say like making comics and writing is like almost solving a puzzle, and this is as close as I ever got to something where I felt like the character arc, and the world were all together in one thing. Like I was like, oh, finally I've told a clear story that I don't have to make excuses for. So I appreciate that. And it came out of just research. When people ask that question, where do your ideas come from? My ideas come from listening. Like I just have my ear open all the time for a phrase. Sometimes just hearing a phrase will kick off an idea. In this particular case, it was I'm working with James Tinian on Project Blue Book, or it's called Blue Book, about UFO investigations and stuff. And he has a spin-off of Blue Book called True Weird, and it's about weird stories. And I had always been fascinated by a story about this thing called the Green Children, the Green Children wool pit, which happened in like 1138 or 1200 or something like that in England, where these kids showed up in this village. Their skin was green, their clothes were green, their hair was green. They didn't speak the language, and they were brought in, and they were dying of malnutrition, and they would only eat certain weird foods. The one kid dies, the other one continues to live. And as she learns to speak English, she tells them this crazy story about how they're from this land called St. Martin's Land, where there's a church bell and it's the other side of the river and it's twilight all the time. And basically it became part of this like fairy lore. Now this story, I loved it. And then what I found out doing the writing or the research of it was that one of the people who first recorded it was William of Newburgh, who was a monk and historian, one of England's first historians. He wrote this book that took place during the time of the anarchy, which recorded all of the struggles between Queen Matilda and Stephen and all the stuff that fell out of that. And alongside this very real history, he's writing about revenants, ghosts, in this case, fairies. And as I'm reading it, like there's multiple stories. And he's even called England's first vampire hunter, even though the dude never left the monastery. Like all of his stories were just folk stories that he was writing right next to the history, because to him, that was the real world, right? The spiritual world was very much a physical thing to them. So I found that this story, this guy also wrote these other stories about demons coming to life and stuff. So this William of Newbury, all 4 stories that are in there are all stories that he recorded. I just rewrote them and put them together in some sort of chronological order, and then tied his life into it. So is a lot of readers will know sometimes when you come up with an idea, you'll find something historical where it just starts to fall into place for you. Something's being written for you. It's like you're like an archaeologist. You're just digging out the story that you need from the stuff that you find, and that was part of that. And I love it. I'm doing more. We haven't announced anything yet as far as like Dark Horse Publishing or whatever. I'm just already starting to work on it, which is kind of how I do everything. I just start working on it, I'll find a publisher or not, or I'll get in advance or not, but I'll just start doing the story if it's something I want to do. So there's going to be more Newbery for sure.
Well, you know what I got from the very first page of your story, actually the cover, was a strong Fleischer Brothers vibe.
Oh, sure.
When I'm looking at the ghosts and stuff. And, well, I was going to ask if that had any sort of influence, but
sure, because in the medieval manuscripts, there's tons of drawings of skeletons all over the place, and a lot of times they are dancing, or they've got like a trumpet or something like that. And of course, it reminded me of all those like 1920s, 1930s dancing skeleton stuff. So right. I really tried to animate that so Newberg sees these skeletons in the sky, human skeletons. And when he sees them, there this warning that of this next story that's about to unfold. His doom is getting closer as he's getting more. And the more fun I had with the skeletons, the more dancing they were, the more alive they were. And that was one of my favorite parts. Was like finding those pages where I can just draw the dancing skeleton.
You had a moment or two where I could swear I could hear Cab Calloway.
Sure, absolutely. I grew up in a time of television where you get reruns of everything, from the beginning of time. It wasn't just what was relevant for the last 20 years. So like all those cartoons and Cab Calloway specials and stuff like that. I'm familiar with all that. And yeah, I think it's in there in the back of the head someplace. Yeah.
I saw Cab work a couple of times. It was just an amazing experience in my life. But I've been a fan forever. I'm a roots music fan, so everything that came out of the Caribbean and up the river from New Orleans and wound up hanging out in my hometown for a while, and then came out Detroit, New York. I loved every note of that.
Yeah,
so it's not unusual for comics to sort of sing to me.
Mm-mm.
But St. James Infirmary Blues from Cab Calloway and Betty Boo, that's weird.
Yeah.
I kind of want to keep talking about this a little bit and kind of even bring in After Realm as well, because there's something you said recently about younger creators needing to slow down on world building or the fascination with world building. I thought that was really interesting. And I think it's important because both those books that you've both written and drawn recently are full of rich worlds. And we've talked to a bunch of creators here, some of whom spend a lot of time building out the world that you don't see. But if you could kind of reiterate what you were saying, like that,
sure. Younger
creators, you can see where they get stuck in just building the world and not actually telling the story.
Yeah. Well, first, before I get into it, I just want to say, like there's nothing wrong with this idea of building out real world and stuff like that, and we all do it. Yeah. I think the problem is it becomes.
You're right about that.
Yeah, it is fun. It's one of my fun part of the books. I got my sketchbook and I'm like drawing out the ideas and stuff, and that's all part of that. But it is. So I noticed this. So Brian Bendis teaches here at Portland State a comic book class, and Taki taught with him a couple of years. So I would sit in on these classes and listen. And so many of the students were just stuck in two things, which were you should know. But they would get stuck in them like a black hole or something, right? It's the world building, and it was like story templates, like understanding like story structure, whether it's Robert McKee's thing or Dan Harmon's thing or whatever. And they'd get so focused on these things that they wouldn't actually start writing. And world building is like that, and it can be so fun and addictive. What you should do is just play D&D, or you should play. That's a role-playing game where you want to build out this kind of world and stuff. But your story will naturally world build if you build your characters first. If you know what your character and your story is, everything else is going to just spin out of that. Like it'll be in the wake of the boat of your story. When I created William Newberry,
I love that. I love that line. I love that because you used that before, where you say that the in the wake of your character, right? That's all that
the world,
the reader is going to see. Really.
exactly, yeah. The world building will be in the wake of a character.
Right.
And I experienced that the first time when I saw the Lord of the Rings films when I was younger. I hadn't read the books, so there's all these moments where they would talk about, this tower of so-and-so and the sword of Narsil. I didn't know what it was, but it was enough to get me more interested, right? And like to fill in blanks in my own head. And then I want to pursue the deeper world and all that stuff. But it wasn't a distraction to it in any way.
The thing you need to avoid, you do a wonderful job of this, and you're not alone in this, is to give the reader a sense that you're just making it up as you go along.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you're making it up. You have a good idea right there, but you know what you're talking about. If it's all well planned, it's fine. But if
You're right.
I call the syndrome wrapped in plastic after Twin Peaks, because it was clear to me that after the first few episodes, none of them thought they'd still be on the air. They had no idea where to take the show.
Yeah,
it was actually a disappointment to me. But editors shouldn't be allowed to watch TV shows.
Oh, we're the worst. Like once you know story, it's hard. Yeah. But it is rewarding when you find something that's really well done. Oh my God, they're doing all the right things.
Absolutely.
But you're right about this world building thing. Feeling like you're making it up as you go along. Because a good example, I hate being critical of things because you're going to work with or whatever, but I'm going to do this anyway. Okay. Like Wheel of Time. I remember watching the Wheel of Time show, and like they are so heavy-handed on their world building stuff. And I know they have books full of characters with character arcs, right? And instead of leading with that, it's set piece and this piece, and let's, like it felt like forced. Like look at our world building instead of listen to our characters, and then your characters will lead you into that.
Yeah, I think something like that is a perfect example. Like, I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't watched season 2 yet. I know that season 3 is like probably out, but I'll grant you that, because it just, particularly for somebody who didn't read the books, right, who wasn't familiar with this lore, it felt like they needed to give me 8 books worth of lore immediately, and I needed to understand all of this stuff where it grew through chapter after chapter.
And again, Lord of the Rings, I didn't know anything about the Silmarillion or Liberian or any of the backstory and stuff, and they built it in a way that you didn't need to. Like that, it grew out for that in a natural way, and the characters embody. If your character, this is a neat trick that I learned, was if your character embodies the story you're telling, right? So in William of Newberry, it is about a character who lost his soul because of or he believes he lost his soul with an encounter with a fairy world when he was a child. So he thinks he's doomed, right? Him and his brother. So you've got a monk without a soul looking to save his soul in a world that's collapsing under this anarchy period, right? So I threw in some plague. There wasn't plague during this time period, but I threw in plague because it was fun. So you got the plague, you've got civil war, you have a battle for the soul of the world is happening. So it reflects what's happening in his character. So his story, his personal story, is the story of the country, this larger story that's going on. Christian Walker in Powers, he's a cop who was a superhero, and that's his secret, right? For the longest time, where that's the setup of it. And then all the superheroes in the Powers universe have a secret. There's a backstory to them. They're not what you see on the surface. So the character, if the character is the story, you don't have to set up a whole bunch of stuff going around, explaining things, right? It becomes part of the subtext. It becomes part of the lattice of the character and the story together. And when it's working, it's a beautiful thing. I've also done it the other way where it doesn't work. So,
sure. When comics shifted, and I credit Marvel and Stan, Jack, and Steve for this more than anybody else, but other people have done it just as well. When they shifted from being situation-oriented to character-oriented, we saved the soul of comics, of American comics. Absolutely. The Bizarro World is a situation. Bizarro
As a character.
is a character, and he
Yeah.
created that world, and we understand it better through his eyes than through our own.
Yeah. I mean, we often talk about mechanics in a film or a television show. They kind of don't matter. What really matters. I mean, they matter, but not to the level of the character. Depending on the kind of story you're telling. I mean, if you're doing a straightforward, like an old school Arnold Schwarzenegger film, like it does matter how the machine works or whatever, right? But most of your character-driven stories, that's the main thing. We're big fans of Severance. And we're talking about like, well, how do the numbers work and all these kind of things. And most of those questions don't need to be addressed. What needs to be addressed is like, what happened to Mark's wife? How is he going to handle this? How is he going to handle his sense of self-identity? How are any of these characters going to handle their sense of self-identity over, how does, data refinement work? You could answer that, but it's not the answer that you need.
And it's also more interesting to watch it unfold.
Yeah. And they do such a great job at just, I don't know, making things connect, whether they mean to or not, or need to, because they're also creating almost like a color palette with their story and character themes, where one thing leads into another, or it echoes in something else. So even if it's not meant to be like some clue, what it is it's sort of echoing the theme of the character in the story. So you see it everywhere. So everything fits, versus you see this sort of awkwardness of we need to explain how these numbers work so hard that we're going to stop and talk about it.
Yeah,
I don't need that. You kind of brought up something that, like, if somebody told me that Severance was based on a Bendis Oeming book, I would believe it. But in that way, how do you think making comics has changed for you throughout your career? And kind of to play on that, like, have people approached you about asking you that, like, as a mentor, now that we're middle aged, how does that work for you?
So how has it changed the storytelling?
Well, just making of comics, like how
I mean, it's just wildly different, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of advice for people coming up now because it is so different. Like I said, when I first started, I had to do like weird porn parody comics, to guarantee a sell that maybe nobody would even see, even if it came out. There used to be a path of, you work on some indie books to get the attention of. Well, even to get on the indie books, you have to write a snail mail. You have to put a package together to send to the editors and the publishers, and hope you hear back. Like none of this stuff makes sense anymore.
Right.
Now what's great is you can kind of just do it. It hurts me sometimes to talk to younger people about this because it sounds like you're talking down on some level, but it is so easy to do now. There were so many walls and barriers before that there aren't now. The hardest thing now is getting attention because it's a flat playing field.
Sure.
That's the hardest thing, and like, I don't know how social media works anymore. I think there was a model there, like we used it early on, but now it's completely broken.
Yeah, there was until somebody bought it.
Yeah. So like the best thing now is you can just make your own comics. You put them up on any platform. I don't think there's a wrong choice, whether it's Tapas or Webtoons or your own website, and just as long as you're throwing it like spaghetti out there into the world, people will see it. As long as you're happy and doing it for yourself, that's the thing. Now there's crowdfunding. That's a whole other wild, amazing thing.
And you're taking advantage of those things too, right?
I'm doing all of it. Yeah, because sometimes I'll create a story. There's no lane for it. After Realm, I was figuring out as I was doing it, and we tried to do it through Image, and I did it after the fantasy bubble burst over there, so it only lasted 3 issues, but then thankfully just go ahead and do Kickstarter, and it worked out.
Crowdfunding has changed the nature, the substance, and the direction of the comics industry. It seems over a very short period of time, but I have a short attention span, so I really don't know that. But it allows for possibilities mean, yeah, a lot of projects don't make it. Okay, yeah, that's part of life. And this way, at least you haven't done that much work before you find out it's a flop. But but a lot of projects that couldn't have happened otherwise are happening this way.
Some of my
it changes the publisher's self-analysis. When Dark Horse started to do crowdfunders, and I'm not saying they were the first. You're thinking, wow, established publisher, and they're going to the internet. Why is this? Well, because there's no damn money. We understand that. You have to go beyond that. What can you do with the opportunities that this presents? And we do a lot of crowdfunder interviews at Pop Culture SquadCast. Absolutely, because Bob and I think our viewers, although who knows, support or are interested in the industry boldly going where it hasn't gone before.
Yeah, that's been some of the most exciting things to me. Well, I kind of met you guys through TikTok, and there's tons of artists on there who are, they don't have a presence in mainstream or direct market, right? But they're making comics right there on TikTok. They're selling them through their TikTok store. Some of them, I think, are doing really good numbers. I'm so blown away by like Iron Circus Comics. Cat Camilla is another one. A handful of other friends who are doing. Like, I'm so inspired that, like, because I got in through all the gatekeeper ways, right? And I've also seen how unfair and how unlevel that ground is, especially looking back, right? And to see like new people who don't have a name behind them build something really big, right? I'm going,
perfect example.
I want to learn how to do that. And I'm saying that as a 30-year pro. I want to learn how to do what you did, right?
Yeah.
Spike, they're perfect examples.
We're following, I think, in the lead of the music industry. Which
I think they're doing better than the music industry.
Once it got turned over to the computers and the record industry started to, as it was known at the time, started to wither, and these big cigar chompers didn't have the money to spend to throw all these records up against the wall to see what sticks, because people were doing it on their own. They were putting it on the internet. You can buy it that way, but first you're going to get your exposure that way. And the goal is not to be signed by Sony Records. The goal is to entertain people and make a living while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Big shift in the creative forces behind that. That's a major institutional change. And it's really fun to see us go through that in comics.
It is. It's a weird place where, the industry is just very different. All the companies are different. It's evened out the playing ground in such an interesting way. Mad Cave is this company. I started working with them. We talked about earlier with Mags Fasagio. We're doing Galaxy of Madness together, and I saw that announcement. That was amazing. And they were off my radar for the longest time. And I was unaware that they could sell books. They figured out a way around the direct market while being in the direct market. You don't have to throw out the old model just because there's new paths and stuff, and they figure out how to do both. And there's other companies like that. Like, sometimes I've never heard of them before, and they're doing amazing high quality stuff. And it used to be, there's a very narrow path for that kind of stuff. Like way back, it was, early Image and Fantagraphics, and maybe one or two others. Dark Horse, of course, yeah. But all that kind of disappeared for a while, and then this open field happened.
Well, it's interesting because I think everybody in this industry, no matter what part of the industry you're in, has to be diversified in your outreach. We have this little podcast that we do on Tuesday nights. We have a website that all of us write on. But I spend a lot of my time finding every outlet we can. Whether TikTok is one of the things we do here. We just kind of advertise there. It's not a place that's a platform necessarily for us at this point, but it's something that we have to find our way to. And I think that with all publishers and anybody who wants to be a publisher, I mean, that's the thing. Like some people, they decide that they want to make comics and they got to figure out how to make money. And some do a good job and they don't do it long enough, right? You know, we all have those flame out burns, you know, with publishers. But I think right now, I think that the power of the big two has dropped considerably over the last 5 years for sure. And I think that the power of some of the smaller companies has kind of evened out a little bit. And I think we're in a good place. It's precarious as always, but I think we're in a good place right now.
I agree with you, but there's a necessary addition I must make. I must impose. Who's benefited the most are the creators, are the writers and the artists and the folks in the broadest sense who actually produce the work, because now it's not like an indentured servant type of relationship where, you know, you're grinding out Superman or whatever it is, and you may like it, but you know, this is what you do for 30 years. And now it's like, no, I can shop this around, or I could do it on my own, or I can find another way, I can find another medium. The power and the authority and the work is on the creators' hands. But since the creators justifiably don't fully trust publishers, maybe not the malicious part, because that's rare, but you know, the bureaucratic part is overwhelming. Okay, fine, do it yourself, or do as much of it as you want, or at least start it on your own.
And then you find out how hard it is to be a publisher.
Sorry?
And then you find out how hard it is to be a publisher.
Been there, done that.
It was very eye-opening. And I was like, how does any company afford to do this?
Well, that's right. The biggest disappointment of being a publisher and is that you still need money.
Yeah.
And the people who are going to give you that money expect a return on investments. These days, like the last half century, they expect that instantly. And that's not going to happen in publishing. Publishing has always been a lousy business to be in, except for a few unique folks. So like the music industry, we've kind of figured out a way around it.
For sure.
And it's beautiful.
It is. It is. And like my career is a combination of all of the above. You know, I did a Batman story a couple months ago with Jonathan Rivera and Nick Filardi for like, it was a Mr. Freeze story. The Kickstarter thing with After Realm was all me. Working with Dark Horse on stuff, working with Matt Cave on stuff, going to, looks like I might do something with Abrams, you know, and they're all different models. And sometimes you work on stuff like I'm also working on a graphic novel now where I'm not going to break even on it. You know, I know that that's what the deal is. And then there's other books that are going to pay for the what that's not doing, but I'm also doing that graphic novel not getting paid well because I want to, you know.
Right.
So, you know, like all the models apply, you know, and you figure out how does this work. You can't always figure out how it works, you know. But it's wonderful to have all these choices, you know.
That's right. That's right. Choice is not something that our medium has had a lot of between roughly 1950 and 2000.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like you work for Marvel, you work for DC, you know, you work for Harvey.
Yeah.
Which is great. I'm a Warren Kramer fan. But there's, you know, work for Archie. There's some beautiful stuff being done there. But that was it. Those are your choices.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we got a barn out and back. God, that's a reference that probably most people are too young to figure out. I got a barn out and back. We're going to bury Mickey Rooney in it.
You know, we talked a lot about the industry, and I want to change the subject just a little bit. You know, people who know you from one thing or another may not realize how much you've written in your career, how much you've written that you've drawn or written for other people to draw. How is there a difference in how you approach a project that you write versus a project that you draw, or that versus something that you write and draw?
There's no longer a difference.
Okay.
What I've learned, and this was something I learned the hard way, which is a lot of times when I wrote for myself, I'd write almost Marvel style and very open. But often when I was writing for myself, it was on a project, I'm going to do this over the next 6 months. But then a project that's going to pay the bills comes in. So now I got to put that aside. So a year later, I'm coming back to this thing. I'm not exactly sure what I was feeling or thinking at that time. So there's been times where I've sort of been finding the script as I'm writing it. And just what I learned to do is to just write for myself as I write for other people. I just pretend it's somebody else. Because sometimes, and a couple of times, I'm not the person who's going to end up drawing it. I thought it was a creator-owned thing for me. And then I go, oh, I'm not going to get to this for 5 years. So, it's also just a good writing exercise. It's just good for me to do my best on the script, even for myself. But I used to be very open and vague in finding things. And it's sort of a good example is that if you got the After Realm full story, like, I'm super happy with the whole thing, but it was this kind of work in progress experiment. There's a whole section of the character that happens when she's much younger. That happened because somebody approached me about a new web thing that they were going to do, had a lot of money behind it. Other people started working on it. So I was like, all right, this will be great. I'll do my little story with her here, which will then lead into the adult thing, kind of build an audience for it. But then that thing collapsed, even though I had already drawn a bunch of it. So now I'm marrying two different stories into one thing, and finding a narrative for that and writing it very loosey-goosey. I realized I was writing two horses at once, where the story needs to have one direction, right? Your character can want multiple things, but they can only want one thing, and you've really got to decide what that is. So that was part of me wanting to tighten all my scripts up. Another part of that was my wife, Taki Soma, wrote her biography. It's called Sleeping While Standing. And it is her wild life story. Not even the worst stories, which is crazy when you read it. But she chose to tell it, each story, each chapter, 4 pages tops. So no matter what was happening or how deep you could get into these stories, she figured out how to laser-like focus on what matters in that experience. And through her, I learned to edit all of my nonsense away. I don't need to have every thought that I had in here. I don't need to have everything that is relevant to the character or the story. I need to know what is the main thing that's relevant to the character and story. So a combination of writing too loosey-goosey for myself and watching her do that got me to totally change everything the way that I write, which is now, whether it's for myself or somebody else, I'll just write full scripts.
Everything I've ever written, I do a lot of writing. I write for Pop Culture Squad every week. Everything I've written, I have taken out stuff that I love.
That's the best part.
Editor never sees.
Yeah.
Killer line.
Yeah.
Just loved it. It was just beautiful. And it would be
sometimes I know it's missing
anywhere else, and I had to cut it.
But it's
because
also
it wasn't absolutely necessary.
And it isn't rewarding when you make that choice. Because writing is choices. Right? If you're not making choices, you just, I don't know. You use a bad word here. You're just masturbating on the page. Like, you have to make choices. Otherwise, you're just playing around. One of my favorite things is, like, I've learned to letter. And I had to do that necessity because I couldn't afford to pay a letter on certain things. And but that was such a great learning experience to learn really how much dialogue can fit on a page without it being overcrowded. It's like, yeah, I can force all of this into the panel, but if I can find the right phrase that takes these 3 sentences and says it in 4 or 5 words, right? It's really hard. But when you're able to do that, it's like you've done a magic trick. And like my wife and I sometimes we'll spend an hour trying to figure out how to take this and turn it into that. And it's like high-fiving afterwards, and then creatively it's better. Like artistically, you're saying something without spelling it all out, and you're inviting the reader to come in with you and understand what you're saying and to fill in the subtext. And you get rid of a bunch of exposition that way, and then it's the best feeling, because sometimes You just can't. Sometimes you just got to exposition your way out of a scene.
Every practitioner in the comics medium needs to have the ghost of Alex Toth on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Not because your audience, your reader, will not get it, but because you're assuming that he won't, and that's wrong.
Yeah. Also, like, there's just restrictions. There's just space restrictions on a page, and simple doesn't mean stupid or less than,
Right.
In fact, it's a higher art form as far as I'm concerned. I spend a lot of time on my work taking lines out, like, especially when I'm working digitally. I've got another layer on there, and I'm just waiting things out. I'm spending maybe 20% of the time taking stuff off of the page.
Yeah.
It's hard, but it says more.
And you're right. The end result is so much more satisfying because it's better.
Yeah.
And at least for me, I rapidly forget what brilliant work I had done that I cut.
I've never missed anything that I cut,
Right.
And a good way to relate to this, if you're not a storyteller, everybody's had to write an email that was really important. Whether you're arguing with somebody or you needed to get a point across that was really important. And if you've got a paragraph, it's going to get lost. And you can take a day or two or even longer to get that down to just a couple of sentences. That's what writing is like, right?
Sure.
Because otherwise you could just sit there and just word vomit, but your point's not going to get across, and especially if it's something you're in a disagreement with, people are just going to be distracted by all this other stuff that you're bringing up. Right? And that happens in stories too. Like, you get so distracted by all the world building, you're missing out on what the character is talking about. Why did this character change? What does this character want? So yeah, write an email short, and you know what it's like to be a writer.
That's right.
Sometimes the amazing thing about telling a story is that when the creator may say, line A gets you to line B via point C, but you don't tell them about C, and they create a D but still get to B, and that's the amazing part, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes that's an example where you have less, where you're just saying, hey, we got there. You can figure out how they got there, and if it works for you, then it works.
Yeah, the audience participation part is very important.
Yep.
Especially, I'm sure everybody goes through this. As you get older, you really start to hate when people in a movie or a television show are telling you the thing that they're doing.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, I'm not. I know you're a bad guy. You don't have to say I'm a bad guy.
Yeah, right. I can see that. Come on.
There's a very particular line in my head that I'm thinking about, like from a film. It's like it's such a badly written line that you could tell that it was written because they felt like they had to explain something.
Yeah.
I won't.
And it was probably a note that somebody with a gun had and gave the writer and said, "Put this in.
I'm going to shoot you with this gun."
I don't understand how anybody can work in Hollywood. I've been in those writers' rooms. I have good friends. We all do, who do that for a living. And then some asshole with a degree at a school he couldn't find on a map tells you, no, that's wrong. Our audience, your audience, you schmuck. What? Your audience? It's not your audience.
How many of the best shows were the best shows because they were pre-planned to be the best show?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How many good shows failed because they stopped?
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a line from Norman Lear that is brilliant and offensive, but true. He would look at a script from a newbie, read it, and go, "Oh, yeah, this is good. It'll rewrite well." Okay, that's television. I get that. That shouldn't be offensive.
Sure, yeah.
And if you're going to be offended by that, you need to do something else for a living because you're not going to make it in television.
Yeah, it's all rewriting. Yeah.
Yeah, but this will rewrite well. It's like, no, my words.
I'm gonna throw a couple of projects that you've worked on, and I want to get your opinion on what that was like for you. One is Dick Tracy.
Oh yeah. I wanted to work on that so bad. Chris Ryle, bless his heart, had tried to get Brian and I to do it years before, and it just didn't work out. And then it came around, and like, it's not that I'm the biggest Dick Tracy fan, but I am just such a fan of what it did in comics history, if that makes any sense. So I just dove into it, and like it got me to just embrace. Every now and then I'll do something in comics where, because of the history behind it, it gets me to open up my mind even more to the basics of stuff. I did an issue of the Spirit comic when DC was doing it, and the same thing happened. Like, I learned how to, with the Spirit, I learned how to use panels to tell a story. Like the way that Eisner would just open up a page where the building would be the frame, the characters inside of the building, which is the frame, that sort of stuff. Dick Tracy was also about that, just the greatest traditions in comics, and trying to pull things out of that while giving it hopefully a slightly different spin on it. And I just had so much fun. It was one of the best experiences that I had in comics. And yeah, I don't know if I'd do it again, just because it was such a perfect experience,
Right. Sure.
I get that. I sometimes think that Joe Staton feels the same way. He always wanted to do Dick Tracy, and then he did it for 10 years. He says, okay, that's it. I think I'm going to come back now. Chet Gould is one of the major creators in comics, in the league with Milton Caniff and with Al Trim and Roy Crane, and all the comic book people who grew up reading those guys, which is at least 2 or 3 generations of comic book people. But if you go back and read like the Tracy reprints,
I got a bunch of those.
Particularly from the 30s and 40s and 50s up until about 1960. Brilliant work. Villains, they're villains. You don't have to dress up in black. They're villains, and they're wonderful villains. And sometimes they're very human villains.
Oh, for sure. That was the best thing.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. We think of Tracy villains the way we think of Batman villains, and that's wrong. They're totally different. They're totally different. They just look weird, and we like that.
All right. So I got two more projects that I want to talk about. One is Mice Templar. So how did you get involved in that? Number one, and what was that experience like?
Mice Templar goes back to Powers, like when I was in that booth. Again, my son was born, and one day he's very young, and we're walking around like Best Buy or something, looking at DVDs that were coming out, and there was Secret of Nim, right? And Secret of Nim and Watership Down animated were 2 things that just imprinted on me at a very young age. And Lord of the Rings was a thing that I loved, especially the Hobbit animated that Bashki did. I think it's fantastic. Like, so those 3 things really imprinted on me. And so it just sort of hit me like lightning, that sword fight that happens at the end of Secret of Nim, mice with swords, it just built out of that. And I just started to create the characters in the world really roughly. And Brian Glass and I have been friends for years. Our early Create Our Own stuff goes back together. And he has a much more sort of cosmic view of things than I do. And I realized, speaking of world building, like what I was making needed to be bigger than what I was doing. So I invited Brian on, and then he just spun that out into like creating this amazing religion and cosmology background, all which ties into the character stuff. Like, he didn't create it for the fun of it. Like, it was all where the character was going. thinking about how mice work, that they're nocturnal animals, and thinking about how the seasons affect animal life and stuff. And lots of fun. I miss it. It would be fun to do again sometime. Kind of hoping like even the Newbery thing helps that a little bit,
Sure.
And I just love anthropomorphic stuff. Like there's a cuteness to it that doesn't need what's weird is I hate the on the nose cuteness of anthropomorphic stuff because it's already cute. So why, unless it's for 5-year-olds, which is fine, why add to it, and I think David Peterson has the same sort of point of view. Like he sees his world as not talking down to children.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a new mouse guard coming out tomorrow as well. So.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And so I've got a lot more anthropomorphic stuff that I want to do. There's obviously more William Newbery, the Mice Templar is part of that world. And I've got another thing that I sort of accidentally created by asking myself questions about why anthropomorphic and what does it mean and stuff. Like William Newbery has a specific point of view on it. I don't want to get too deep into because I don't want to over-explain it to people. But like, there's a reason why the animals are animals, but then saints and stuff like that are in human form. But I'd rather have readers read into that than anything else.
That's cool. That's great. I like that. The other book that I wanted to talk about before we, it gets too late here, is Cape Carson.
Oh man, that was so fun.
So, first of all, Young Animal was fun in general.
Yeah.
I mean, all those books were so great. But working with Gerard, initially, and how was that experience?
Oh, the whole thing was great. I'm so grateful that Gerard wanted to do this thing, and then he had a vision for oddball comics and oddball creators. This is where I met Mags. Was like we had never physically met, but it was just through social media and supporting each other's Young Animal books. Several other creators from there I just got to know because of this thing that we're all doing together. Gerard was great. We spoke a couple times. We actually met a few times before that at comic shows.
Sure.
And one of the things I loved about it is it's one of the few monthly books that I've ever done. Like it ran for about 2 years. Never missed a deadline. I think I got close to missing a deadline once, and like I told them a week ahead or something. Working with Nick Filardi, who's like my other partner in life, along with Taki and Bendis.
Sure.
Just creating wild and crazy stuff. Became really, really good friends with Jonathan Rivera, who wrote it. It was also like this whole branch of DC stuff that I knew about and I was interested in, but I never had a real reason to dive into it. It's just like they're, the weirder stuff, right? So, we got to build really fun characters. It was an amazing experience. It's tough when you do something like that and you love it and it's over and comics move on. Like, I don't get to hear about it enough. When it came out, of course, there was lots of, I feel like it's still this thing that people should be being able to, get something out of. And it's not just because I drew it, but the whole experience.
I will evangelize all of the Young Animal stuff. I think people should read all the Young Animal stuff. I think it's
So what we need, and we've come close to making, but haven't pulled it off yet. We need streaming comics, not in the sense that they never end, which we already have, but in the sense that if you want to come in on issue 7 but you want to read issues 1 through 6 first, or at least issue 1, you can do that without moving.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have digital comics and stuff, and I'm actually a big fan of it because I'm an old man and my eyesight is going. So,
I'm with you, man.
Yeah, they keep on making bigger iPads, so I'm thrilled. But we need to have that instant access without charging an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
You should subscribe to HBO, which, by the way, just took Looney Tunes off. Don't get me started.
So many weird decisions going on there. On
oh God, yes. Discover starts at home.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm losing my thought here. But you don't pay extra to HBO because you want to watch, the second season of The Sopranos.
Mhm.
And comics should be similar to that. Now,
Yeah.
what that means is that you got to make up your money somewhere, but not to make up the $5 for that first comic book. You're making money overall. And the comics, getting people to read the comics is where it starts. So make it easier for them to get you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the publishers don't care about back issues. The back issues are not. That's
because some assholes told them they shouldn't be, and that happened 20 years ago.
Well, but back issues are already a sunk cost. It doesn't matter anymore, right? So for example, like I didn't have very much experience with Cave Carson other than the DCCP crossover with the Forgotten Heroes, right? Like that's probably your first experience with him, at that back in the day. You saw that
I had to pretend like when the editor called me, I had to pretend like, oh yeah, Cave Carson, yes.
Yeah. No, there was that one issue with Dolphin and Animal Man in it, and that's it, right?
Oh, I loved that. Cave Carson was a major disappointment to me throughout my childhood because whenever they had a hole in the schedule for Showcase or Brave and the Bold, they'd stick Inside Earth stories in it. Some of them were great, some of them sucked by the standards of the time, but they didn't know what to do with the property. Yeah. So you had more meat going in your series than the entire run of every Cave Carson story.
I think that's because Gerard's vision for it and then Jonathan's writing on it was all character based. It was a father-daughter story. And you don't see a lot of father-daughter stories.
That's right.
It's mother-daughter, father-son, not a lot of daughter and father stories, and that's what it focused on. That was the main thing.
Yeah. Oh, it was brilliant.
And my favorite thing that spun out of that, you can find it on YouTube. I even got permission to do like a video with it. Gerard created a song for Cave Carson called "Wandering into the Cave." And it's just haunting and beautiful, and
I'm gonna check
that was super awesome. Yeah,
that's awesome. We're gonna wrap things up pretty soon, but I want to thank you for doing this and for being on. Your first issue of the Assassin's Creed book just came out last week, right?
Yeah.
You're on more Galaxy of Madness that's coming soon, which it's interesting because the word verisimilitude has become just this ubiquitous thing. Because besides the fact that, like, I know, like, when I saw she named the ship that, I'm like, that's Max. But there's another book that just came out last week that I just read, and it has that same word throughout it, and it's it's something we talk about on this show a lot, just because it's important for being believable, right? So I think that's fun.
It's also a really cool word.
It is.
Listen,
I use the word all the time.
I said it, but I said a little prayer before it came out of my mouth that it came out appropriately.
It's funny, when I read that she named the ship that, you'd think you'd stop and go, why would you call a ship that? But I didn't. Like, it immediately seemed natural, I think it's because of the way I was reading the rest of the story. Like, she built something into it so that the subtext was already there, and that's what I mean by like connecting the characters to the story and the world. It made sense, when I was like, oh yeah, no, that's a great name for the ship. It's perfect.
The difference between you and me is that I can say the word. You seem to know how to spell it.
Oh no. No, it's all autocorrect. My wife will often ask me, how do you spell so and so? I'll say with autocorrect.
Autocorrect is my response to people who talk about AI.
Yeah.
Until they can tell the difference between there and there, I don't want to hear about AI.
Sure.
So what else? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about?
That
we can't talk about?
I mean, there's something we hinted at that we can't talk about, but it ties into the Powers 25th anniversary.
Oh, that's
cool. I'm going to do more William Newberry. There's a graphic novel I can't really talk about yet. Blue Book, I'm working on the next arc of Blue Book, so we can talk about that with James Tinian. God, I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, I got my schedule. This is what my schedule looks like.
Oh,
That's a lot of work.
We work it every single morning. We figure out like what I got to do. I'm doing covers for my wife's book, but I can't say what that is yet.
Nice.
Yeah, just keeping plenty busy.
That's great.
But the best place to find me is just somewhere on social media, my newsletter.
I think I'm going to rename the last 20 minutes of our SquadCasts as the segment where people can talk a lot about stuff they can't talk about.
Yeah.
That's true for everyone.
BPRD, the BPRD story with Christopher Roberson, that's coming out right now. The first issue of that is out, and it's Susan Zhang and Hellboy is in it. So that's on the shelves along with the Assassin's Creed.
Good. Awesome. Yeah. I like Chris too.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Thanks for doing this, Mike. Really appreciate it. I hope to meet in person sometime soon.
Appreciate it. And
thanks for having me on.
I thank you and your very talented collaborators
for
entertaining me. You said 30 years? Wow, I guess that's true.
Well, have me on again, I don't know, like a year from now, 6 months, or whatever you want. I'll be around.
You will.
Yeah.
Well, if you got a Kickstarter or something, let us know.
Maybe when we talk about powers, that sounds like a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you. Take it easy. Great guy.
It was great. What a great conversation. It was.
I love when. I mean, we've never had a guest on who I don't like. Now, I think I'm enough of a broadcast professional to be able to hide it. I'm not sure I should, but it hasn't been an issue for me. We've had a lot of guests who I really do like and whose work I really like. And when I get a chance to just sit down and talk with them and you, I'm a pro. I'm a fan. I'm a I'm a breath mint. I'm a floor wax.
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We're going to be back in 2 days. We're going to be back on same time Thursday night. We're going to have senior editor from Mad Cave, Lauren Heidt-Susan, on. She is the curator of the Maverick line, which I know we'll have a lot to talk about with her. And we can talk about some of the other things that she's got going on. She's really, really bright and has some good ideas about how to make comics accessible to people who we want comics to be accessible to.
It sounds like a fun 2 hours, and I'm serious. That's stuff that concerns me.
Yep. I know.
By the way, I have been informed in the last 24 hours that I am on at least 3 panels at Ithaca in a couple of weeks.
That's excellent.
Yeah, and
have you been informed that I'm on them? Because I haven't been informed of my schedule yet. I know that people are working my schedule at Ithaca.
So they're very good. I think that the people who are assigned to my stuff are just more available right now because it's college. It's college. I know one panel that I'm working on, but I don't know the rest of my schedule. I don't know when that is. I just know that I may be talking to somebody who has to do with Thors and frogs. So. Oh yeah, I'm on a panel with him too.
Okay.
With a panel, I don't know if it's the same one.
I don't know either.
Yeah, but plenty of friends of the SquadCast are going to be there. So I hope you out there in Viewerland can join us. Ithaca, New York. Beautiful place. You need to be airlifted into it, but it's a beautiful place.
We will talk more about it as it comes closer. It is the first weekend in April. Mike and I will be there. Dean, our shadow co-host, will be there as well. And
Dean and I are doing the panel.
What's that? Dean
and I are doing the panel.
Oh, nice. Well, listen, you know more about the schedule than I do, so we'll have to
today. Tomorrow will be totally different.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We will see you in 2 days. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for enduring us for all this time.
Yeah. I'll be back in my studio on Thursday night. We'll be ready to go. Everybody, we'll see you later.
See you then. Take it easy.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?